video to show you guys how to do this really cute Easter egg garland that is a tutorial from Olivia Jane Handcrafted. It's on her website, and we made some kits here at Cloth Carousel for you. If you didn't buy a kit, then you'll need, they call for 16, she calls for 16 different fabrics in strips that are cut 13.5 inches long by 1.5 inches wide. For our kit, we did 10 different fabrics that are cut 1.5 inches wide and 18 inches long. So we're kind of just doing ours long rather than short. You would have also gotten some fusible fleece and some SF101 woven interfacing, plus 4 yards of twill tape to sew our eggs onto, and the Easter egg shape template, which you can get from her website. So I'm going to show you how to get started on this.
Okay, so first of all, as far as sewing the strips together, I recommend just laying them all out and basically just picking picking sets that you like together and sewing those together, and then sewing those groups together. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I like this one with this one, you just want to make sure the ends are lined up so you don't end up with sort of a crazy side shape. Also, you could use pins if you want. You could pin along this edge if you need to. And we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam for this project because we don't want to lose too much of our pattern here. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. Do our 1/4 inch seam just all the way down this straight edge. Now I am not going to go over and iron this every time. So this is what I meant about the groups of fabrics that you like together. So then, if you do this with you make all these sets, right? So I would have, you know, all my sets sewn together of what I like. And then I would just pick one to sew onto this. Okay, so this is what I was saying. So now I have 5 groups of 2 each sewn together. So then I'm just gonna choose how I want them to go together. So this one's backwards. So I'm just gonna decide, I don't have my sheep together, so maybe I'm gonna sew these sheep. Oh, whoops, that's going the wrong way. It really doesn't matter which way they go, but then I can just decide that I'm gonna go like this and sew those 2 together. And then once I do that, I'll just sew it to another group and so on until they're all sewn together. So we got all of our strips sewn together. Super cute, so colorful. Don't worry if like your one end isn't all lined up because we're not gonna be using every square inch of this anyway. So here's the trick. We wanna get all of our seams going one way. So just kind of get that, oops, ironed. So just gonna go along and make sure that as you're ironing your strips that you kind of stretch your little rows out as far as they'll go. Don't just like try to iron the whole thing at once because that won't work. So you're gonna go along, just make sure they're all going the same direction. So just, if you're going down, go down. If you're going up, go up. Make sure they all go the same direction. So okay, so I wanted to show you how now all of my seams are going the same direction. Just that way our fabric is really nice and flat. So now everything is ironed out flat. And I'm gonna show you how to trim up your interfacing. so that it'll fit this size. You don't want the interfacing to be larger because then the gluey stuff is gonna get on your iron and you don't want that. So the first piece of interfacing you're gonna put on is the thinner one that's called Shape Flex. This is the one that feels like regular fabric. And you wanna make sure there's these little tiny glue dots that feel bumpy. Make sure that is facing the back of your fabric. So see how big this is? We wanna make sure, yeah, we're gonna trim that up. So if you don't have a rotary cutter, which is what I'm gonna use, you can just kind of trace it roughly with a pencil and cut it with scissors. So we're just gonna trim this up just so that it's the same size as the fabric. Okay. That little piece doesn't want to come off of there. Okay, so now it's roughly the same size, and we're going to take it over to the ironing board. Actually, first I'll show you, we'll go ahead and trim up our the fusible fleece, which is the same kind of thing. This is a little bit harder to tell, but it's super soft and fuzzy on that side, and it has a little bit of bumps from the glue dots on this side. So again, the glue dots are gonna face up toward our fabric, and it's gonna be cut the same size. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that. To cut right there. Okay, so now we have our two pieces of fusible, but we're gonna leave the fusible fleece for last and go iron on our SF-101. So here's a trick about, if you haven't used interfacing, if you have, then you know how to do it. Theoretically, you're gonna put a damp cloth over this. We also have these really cool things called goddess sheets that you can use. It's just like this sheet. Or sometimes I will even, that you put over and then you iron over that. So when you're adhering fusible, interfacing, you don't just iron around like when you're ironing something. You kind of press in one spot for a few seconds, move to a new spot, and that kind of thing. The other option is you can just very lightly mist this. So there's just, oops, okay, my mister isn't working. So there's just a tiny bit of moisture to help the glue kind of melt. So again, you're just gonna press in one spot and then move it, press in a new spot. So you're just gonna kind of keep doing that all over. And then once you've done it all over your piece, usually what I do is I do go, so say I've done the whole thing, even though I haven't, then you can go back and kind of just iron it so it's on there really well. And you can also check a spot and make sure that it's adhering, which it is. And then usually what I do is I just let it sit for a couple minutes to cool off and let the glue adhere to the fabric. So I'm just gonna keep pressing this on here. And we're gonna basically do the same thing with the next one with the fusible fleece, which is thicker and fuzzier. And that's gonna give the eggs a little bit of structure. So we're just ironing this, pressing. So there's not a lot of sewing in this project, it's just the strips. Then just putting this on, and usually I flip it over and I just iron the top just to make sure I got everything nice and adhered. I love these wool pressing mats. I have one at home. I'm at the shop right now, but the one at home I have is Project Wool Mats, and it works amazing. I love it. I have a whole iron cover one, and then I also have a small one like this. Okay, so I'm gonna let that sit for a minute and cool off. And then when it's cool, I'm gonna flip it over and I'm going to adhere the other fusible in the same way. Okay, so you can see that I got the fusible fleece ironed on. So we have like a pretty good like structure to our strip fabric now. And now we're gonna basically just start tracing the egg shapes on to our fabric. So I'm just basically, you can do some that are straight, you can do some that are sort of off to the side, so you get like little diagonal stripes. So I'm literally just gonna start tracing around the egg. If you think that you're gonna make a more than one garland, you might want to trace this egg shape onto like a piece of cardboard and do like a little cardboard cutout, or even like template plastic. You might not be able to see it very well in the video, but I just traced it right on here. And so I'm just going to do that in various directions and angles on here, and then we'll start cutting them out. So I have traced all of my egg shapes. I'm not sure if that shows up very well, but traced all of my egg shapes. So now I'm just gonna start cutting them apart. I'm sort of like rough cutting this because it's hard to cut them straight off of there. It's also hard to see on this one dark fabric. There we go. So you're just gonna cut to where you just cut off the part that you marked. That way you don't have pencil marks on your eggs. And we're just gonna cut around all of these like this. If you find at all when you go to cut these out that it seems like your fabric didn't stick as well as you'd like it to the, see, like this came up just because it's the edge of the seam, because it's a tiny bit, but I'm going to be stitching that down, so I'm not going to worry about it. But if you found that like this piece was coming up, you could just go and iron it down a little bit. So I'm just going to keep cutting these out, and then I'll show you how to sew them onto the twill tape. Okay, so I cut out all my eggs, all different ones. And what you're basically going to do is we'll start about 12 inches. So I leave about 12 inches from the edge. That way if you want to tie it up somewhere, you can leave a longer section if you want. But then what I'm going to do, just so that I'll have a reference for how far apart I'm putting them, is I'm just going to make a mark, and I'm going to space them out about 8 inches. So like one will go here and make a mark 8 inches. And so just make your marks. You could put them closer together if you want. I'm going to do mine a little further apart just because I want it to go in a longer area. So I'm going to head over to the machine. My twill tape at my machine, and I've made my mark where I'm going to put my first egg, and I'm going to set my machine to zigzag. And then I'm going to do a like forwards and backwards zigzag just to really secure my eggs on there. And I'm going to put about maybe have them about a ½ inch over the top. That way they're kind of peeking over the edge there. So just make sure that you're right on the same line as your twill tape. And I'm going to go forward and backward just to make sure it's on there nicely. Okay. And then I'm going to cut thread because I don't want to zigzag the whole thing. And we'll trim threads later. And then I'll look for my next mark, which is here. And I kind of laid my eggs out ahead of time so that I would know which one I wanted to come next. And I'm going to do the same thing forward. Move that thread out of the way. And so I'm just gonna keep doing that all along until my eggs are all sewn on 8 inches apart. I just wanted to say, don't put your eggs too high, like above the edge. Because then otherwise your garland will kind of like tip forward. So just a little bit, not even a half an inch, maybe just like about a 1/4 inch above the edge of the twill tape. The garland is all sewed together. The pieces are attached to the twill tape, and now you can hang it up in your house for a fun little Easter decoration.